Hi, I'm Xian Wen, and today I will be talking about a threat to compliance that my colleague, Mrs. A, has experienced when she was a newcomer. So what happened was that Mrs. A and another colleague, Mr. B, are supposed to work on an assignment together. Mrs. A, as a newcomer with not much experience and knowledge in this area of work, was only supposed to assist Mr. B, so their supervisor decided that Mrs. A should help Mr. B with the parts of the assignment that were more straightforward and simpler. With that, their supervisor suggested the work to be split into two, with each of them taking half of the easier parts of the assignment. This means that after Mrs. A was done with her part, the other half of the work, as well as the more advanced part of the work, would be handled by Mr. B himself, as he is a senior staff. So they started to work on the assignment with the parts assigned. After Mrs. A was done, she informed Mr. B and she thought she was done with the assignment. However, Mr. B told Mrs. A to continue with the assignment, which involves Mr. B's part of the assignment. After Mrs. A did as she was told, she informed Mr. B again, but Mr. B once again pushed his part of the work to Mrs. A, as Mr. B proceeded to teach Mrs. A how to go about handling the advanced work in this assignment, even though she is very new. Mrs. A had to continue with the assignment as told, as she is just a newcomer partnered with a senior staff, but she was still not very familiar with the work. A few days later, after all the work was done, Mr. B decided to look through Mrs. A's work briefly and found many mistakes committed by Mrs. A. Both of them were panicking, as the deadline of the assignment was very near, and there was no time to redo the whole assignment. Hence, Mr. B suggested amending a few figures in order to match up to the correct total sum. Even though they both knew that it was not the right thing to do, they proceeded with it as they both faced the self-interest threat, where they wanted to look good in front of their supervisor. They were also faced with intimidation threat, as they did not dare to own up to their mistakes and were afraid that they would be reprimanded by their supervisor and would lose their jobs. They have both violated the integrity principle as well as competency principle by amending the original figures with no basis, which involves tampering of information that they are handling with. Potential safeguards would involve asking for help and advices from the higher authorities in the workplace, which in this case it would be their supervisor. When Mrs. A first realized that Mr. B was pushing all the work to her, she should have consulted her supervisor about the issue in order for the problem to be rectified to prevent the problem to snowball into a greater issue at the end. Another safeguard would be to approach another colleague of the same level for advice on what to do, as it would be less intimidating for both Mrs. A and Mr. B, as their colleague would not have the authority to fire them even if they tell him or her about the situation. Thank you.